So let's say we have 4 numbers in a sequence. The user will have to type like this. We'll see 1, 1, 3, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 2, like that. But after each individual number typed, you have to verify that. So you have to verify this, you would have to verify this, and each number will have to be verified. So we have our basic functions. We can first gather our user inputs, and we can correspond that with a number. And then when we have our checking as the number as a parameter, we can check if the number is, let's say, what, then we do. If the number is the number that we want, then it is correct. If it's not, then it is wrong. So that'll be that. And every time that it's wrong, we want to set the sequence of numbers back to 0, or the length of it, or you clear it. Doesn't matter, you want the game to restart. So then, how do we get our sequence? So we're going to have a loop that repeats, in this case, 4 times. So the loop will repeat 4 times, and each time it'll generate 1 add-on to the end of the sequence. So it'll be 1, so this will be the sequence, and once we start the loop, after loop 1, it will be 1 number. In loop 2, it will be 2 numbers. In loop 3, like so, keep on going until we get to the number of times we're going to loop it, which is 4 in this case. So 1 number will be tailed on to the end, and each time within each loop, we're going to check if the user inputs the correct number, or color, in this case with lights. So in this case, this one will repeat twice. We're going to check 2 times, because the user will enter 1 and 2. So we're going to check 1 and 2, and then check 1, 2, and 5. And so on. But each time, remember, in this sequence or array, we always start back at index 0, and then go on 1, 2, and then go on 1, 2, 5, as we add more onto the end of the list. So if we go from 0 to the end of the list, that's just 1, because all we have in this list is 1. 0 to everything in the list is 1 and 2. So 0 to index 1, which is 1 and 2. So all these numbers. So wherever you're starting from, index 0 to whatever you have in your list. Because we're adding 1 more every time, this works. But if your program has a different type of logic, you would have to adapt it based on how you're incrementing and adding on your different numbers to the end. Yeah, so let's get started. So first, we want to have on start, we want to initialize our variables. So what I mentioned was sequence and sequence index. So create these. So we're going to set our sequence index to 0 and set our sequence to an empty array. So we're going to set our sequence to an empty array. Okay, now going to start on a basic function. We want to add value to our sequence. So let's do that function. Create a new function called add value. And again, this is like the loop we talked about. Each time, depending on however many times you loop it, it's only going to add 1. So it depends on how many times you run this. So we're going to add value to the end. Adding it onto sequence, and we're going to add a random number between the range 1 and 4. So now we have our add value. let's test that out and call it real quick. Number in it, but we need to be able to see that, so let's put console log sequence. There we go. Start over. So each time I'm running this, you can see one number is being added. Great. So just to demonstrate that, if I do that twice, then there will be 2 numbers. Okay, that's great. So now we're going to add another function called show value. Let's do that with a number. This number will be whatever your answer or correct program wants you to display. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. And everything will be corresponded to this. So we're going to need a condition. If then. If, let's say your number is equal to 1, then let's put the pretty lights on it. You're going to show the ring of a certain, I'm going to do a certain color in this example, but you can do whatever you like. Alright, great. So now we have our 4 little conditionals nested in one huge statement. The reason why we don't want multiple ifs is because multiple ifs will cause all of them to run, or more than one to run. If you put them all, like else if, nested within one chunk statement, then only one of these will run. So that is what we want. Okay, so our function is done. I put a different color onto every possible condition being activated, and that can be put to the side. So now we have our add value and then our show value. Now we're going to make another function called show all. Show all. So this function will use our show value function and to show what the user has inputted. So we're going to get a basic outline. So let's say our program has the sequence as 1, so the user will have to enter a number, and then we have to check if that number is 1. If it is correct, then you move on to this next stage. If it isn't correct, then you just leave. Your progress gets reset and you go back to the beginning. So given this, we have to go from index 0 to every value of our sequence. So in this case, it's just 1. And then in this case, it's 1, 2, and 1, 2, 5. Luckily, we have a built-in statement for element value of our sequence. There we go. So it'll fetch 1, and then 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 5, given that the sequence changes. Now, we're going to call our show value so we can see what's happening. So call show value, and we're going to show what's in our sequence. Great. So now we're going to console log this. We're going to print this. Print it out in our console, and let's make it clear what we're showing. So put a join block so we can say the light shows. And we can put the value on the end, so then we can see clearly what each of our values represent. And then we want to prompt the user to enter our value. Keep in mind this is all in the single loop. So enter value. There we go. And I want to check what the user has entered and make sure that they do enter something. Before we do that though, we're going to connect our user's inputs to the correct place. So this is good enough for now. We can add a note here. Enter value, user enter value, then verify. So we're going to have to do 2 things. We have to get their values corresponding to our key over here, and then we have to verify it. So let's make that real quick. Hop over here, and now we're going to need our event handlers. So an input. On input, this will activate something. So on button A, click, I'm going to show the exact same thing I'm doing over here, but instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll be A, B, and then long click A, long click B. So let's make that real quick. A, and button B click, it'll be this ring. And then on button A, long click, it will be the yellow ring. And then on button B, long click, it'll be on this ring. But how do we correspond this to our check function that we're going to make? Well, let's assign it this number. So on button A, click, let's have a variable. So whatever the user clicks, it'll save that into a number variable so that we can see whether or not these are the same. So let's create a variable called user number. And on button A, I will set the user number to 1, like here, and 2 to that one, 3 to that one, 4 to that one. So now we have it. Each of our functions, each of our inputs, our event handler has a show ring with the colors, and we have a variable with the numbers that the user currently pressed. So let's organize that. Great. So now let's create another function called check guess. So now that we have all of our numbers, we need to check our guess. So let's create a function, check guess. So let's say if our sequence, so we don't have to fill in everything right now, it is just good to have a placeholder. So if something happens, then our console should say correct. Great. Correct. And then if something else happens, then it'll say wrong. Restarted. Great, so that's good. Now we want to use this placeholder to fill in our show all. So we have our user enter in our value, and then we verify. So, but you'll notice a problem. The user doesn't get time to enter the user doesn't get time to enter their input. So what we want is for our program to wait, and while our user input is empty, we're going to wait. What is empty? Empty is 0 because we fill in our numbers here. But what if we don't fill it in? It'll just be 0. So while our user number is equal to 0, then we're just going to wait. So we're going to keep on pausing. Keep pausing. And once that is over, once the code runs over that, which means it has reached the end of the loop, the user has entered something apparently that's made it not 0. We're going to verify it. Well, how do we verify? Check guess. So we're going to use check guess. But now what we're going to do is add the number, because we're going to check what the number the user has entered over here with this number, the key that we have. So we're going to run that, check guess, We don't need this anymore. We're going to check what the user num is. And then afterwards, after we call it, we want it to be reset. We want the user number back to 0. So that way, we can check each of these numbers so that they have an opportunity to enter it in. So show all, our function is complete. Our show value function is also complete. Our user inputs are done. And what we're missing is just a little bit more. Our add value function is also done, so you can put that aside. So now our important thing is how to connect this, the main loop, with our checking each guess. So we just talked about it. We want to check if the number is equal to whatever sequence position we're on. So if we're on position 0, then we're going to check if 0 position, which is 1, is what the user input. And then we increment 1 on the position so that it moves to the second number within the list. And that is 2. So then we check if 2 is what the user has inputted. So let's do that. So again, we're going to use a new method. We're going to see in our sequence, we're going to get value at our sequence index. That is the thing we're going to increment. So if this is equal to the number, then correct. And we're going to, remember what we said, increment it by 1 so that it moves on to the next one and checks it. So we're going to change our sequence index by 1 so that it adds 1 and moves on. That's great. This function is almost done. We're missing one more thing. So after you get whatever number wrong, let's reset our sequence to an empty array. So back at the start, in the beginning. So our check guess function is now complete. Now let's do the main loop. So we start at 0 every time. We set our sequence to an empty array only at the start so that we can append and add as many numbers as we want to the end of it. And then now we're going to add a stopper. So when does the game stop? Well, like we said, this game is going to stop at 4 times. So how do we know if the game has gotten to round 4? Well, every time for my game, it adds on 1 number. So when it gets to round 4, there will be 4 numbers. So let's see. If the length of our sequence is equal to, let's say 4, the number we want to stop at. Then we do something. But in this case, we want it so that it doesn't reach 4. So if it's not equal to 4, then we keep going. If it is, stop. There's also another understanding. If you get to 4, which means you do not reset to an empty array, this means that you won the game. You've got everything correct. So let's add a message after that. So once you've succeeded in getting to 4, you won. You win. Okay, so now we just have to do simple things, is to call our functions. So we do know we need to call our add value because we're adding 1 every time. And we're going to show all that we have every time. And you know what? Let's log our console so we can see what is happening with our sequence right now. And we're missing one more thing. Every time we start back at 0, the position. So I'm going to put that back in. Remember, this is only on start. Everything runs downwards from here, and it does not repeat. So that's why we have to add it again. Also, a quick reminder to remove everything before on onStart to make sure that your onStart looks like this. We were testing some things before, but now change that. So now we should be ready to go. Let's start. 1. Okay, so it's giving me the sequence, and then it's telling me what the light shows. Then let's enter our value. So what I did is 1, 2, and then back to here, long press is 3, and then long press this is 4. So enter value 1. And then it gives you 1, 2. But now we have to verify 1 and 2 again. So 1, correct. The light shows 2. Okay, 1, 2. Correct. And then 1, 2, 3, and then we do that all over again. Let's get one correct. Incorrect this time. 2. Wrong. Restart it. And now the light only shows this one number because our sequence is now back to 0. So we just ended the game. If you want, you can keep on pressing random numbers and it'll show you one number, meaning that it has been restarted. So that's it. We have our main loop. Every time we add our number, and every time we add that number, we proceed to check everything in sequence. So this is a little spin-off of the guide, pretty much exactly the same with minor changes. You can explore and add whatever you'd like. Thanks for watching.